The small town of Woodcrest had turned hotter than the hinges of hell. The air saturated with prayers and dreams. Prayers of heavy rain pattering on the sun-baked soil that could no longer sustain life. And dreams of a cool breeze softening the scorching afternoon heat. And the town lived a farmer by the name of Wilfred Truman. Before the drought, he was deemed the most successful farmer and blessed with a green thumb, able to grow anything and anywhere. Wilfred prayed over every seed before planting them. He was a devoted Christian man who gave his Lord all the glory and praise for gifting him the ability to grow plants and food so abundantly. Wilfred had a selection of crops ranging from red plum tomatoes to vine-ripened melons. Unfortunately, Wilfred had lost his magic touch and was no longer able to grow successfully due to the desiccation of his land. God had never given Wilfred a reason to doubt his faith until now. Everyone in town had become desperate because their resources were scarce. Farmers everywhere joined together to gather the crops they had to distribute to everyone in need. Every farmer except for Wilfred was able to contribute. He could not get one seed to sprout. He'd grown weary and frustrated of trying to figure out a solution to his problem. Wilfred tried every trick to get his crops to grow, until he remembered his old family tradition. There was a secret fertilizer that only the Truman family knew of. This fertilizer would guarantee almost anything to flourish. Retrieving the fertilizer, he sprinkled it over the seeds and commanded them to grow. To his dismay, the fertilizer had failed to work as well. Feeling defeated, Wilfred decided to get some rest to take his mind off his unresolved problems. In his sleep, Wilfred heard a delicate whisper. He awoke and immediately jotted down the Bible verse, Matthew 17:20. He vehemently grabbed his Bible and flipped to the verse, which read, "Because you have so little faith, truly I tell you, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say this to a mountain, move from here to there, and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you." Realization had dawned upon Wilfred. He came to the conclusion that he abandoned his faith in God. He began praying to his Lord, pleading for forgiveness and promising to never stray away again. In the morning, Wilfred was so overtaken with joy and confidence that he skipped breakfast and began planting immediately. He prayed over each seed and recited Matthew 17:20. The faith of a mustard seed, he thought. Wilfred went on about his day, knowing something amazing would occur. Later that day, Wilfred returned back to where he planted his seeds. He found 3 tiny sprouts. He fell to his knees because he understood how God would never let him down. The tears of appreciation and joy flooded his face. Soon his whole field would be filled with crops. Each day that passed, a plethora of crops would grow. Promptly, his garden of plants and vegetables were overflowing like the Nile River. Wilfred was so proud that he just had to tell everyone he knew. People in Woodcrest couldn't believe what he was telling them. Weeks went by of him giving away his crops. There was too much for him to keep for himself. Wilfred began to become arrogant. He'd go around boasting to other farmers about how great he was. The next morning, Wilfred woke up to a desolate, arid, and barren yard. He was in a pool of disbelief, trying to swim out of the deep end. He couldn't begin to fathom what happened to all his crops. It was like the parched ground had sucked down every plant that he'd grown. Wilfred began accusing the farmers of being jealous and taking all his crops. Going into a fit of rage, Wilfred passed out into darkness. In that bout, the same soft whisper spoke to him, giving him a scripture, Proverbs 19:21. When he awoke, he found his Bible and read the verse. Many are the plans in the mind of man, but it is the purpose of the Lord that will stand. Wilfred shook his head in denial. He didn't want to believe that God would take away his beloved crops. God punished him because he became prideful and took all the credit. He ultimately lost focus. A feeling of disgust coursed through his body. How could he have not seen this coming before? Wilfred thought to himself, if he had not been so caught up in trying to prove his superiority, then he'd still have his crops. Now all he's left with is the devil's desolate den, where his crops used to richly grow. Once Wilfred stopped feeling guilty for abandoning God once again, he swore to make everything right. He recited the verse about the mustard seed and believed it like never before. Soon after, the crop sprouted stronger than before and tripled in quantity. He had nothing but admiration and awe for his Lord. Wilfred truly understood that God had a bigger plan for him. He continued to feed his town, ensuring what the faith of a mustard seed would do. The message had spread all across Woodcrest and touched those who had lost their faith. It was a small reminder. After a long day of missionary work, he decided to go home and sleep. Before getting into bed, he looked up and thanked God for all. Finally going to sleep, he heard the familiar whisper saying, 1 John 5:4. The verse in his Bible read, "For everyone who has been born of God overcomes the world. And this is the victory that has overcome the world, faith." Waking up grateful, Wilfred stepped outside to appreciate his surroundings. To his surprise, he saw a black mountain of seamless storm clouds, and the smell of thunder hanging in the air. Tears of the relieved clouds began to wash over Woodcrest. This meant a new beginning. Wilfred thought to himself, "Look at the wonders of a mustard seed.